Every night, I stole the last crusts from my empty pantry and crept into that silent alley with nothing but hope and resolve in my pocket, knowing someone waited, hungry for more than just food. But tonight, as I pressed the stale heel of bread into his trembling hand, distant engines shattered our quiet, revealing a man far more than a beggar in rags. My apartment always felt heavier at night, its silence pressing against me the moment I shut the door. The cupboards yawned empty, a reminder of everything I lacked, yet my feet carried me toward the alley as if guided by something greater than myself. I wrapped the last piece of bread in a scrap of cloth, tied my tattered scarf tighter, and braved the winter air. The streets were nearly deserted, save for the flicker of lamps that barely pierced the cold. When I reached the alley, he was there, as always, hunched against the dumpster, his body small beneath layers of torn fabric. His face was a map of hunger, cheeks sunken, breath shallow, but his eyes met mine with a flicker of expectation. I knelt before him, my hands trembling as I offered the bread. He accepted it carefully, as though it might vanish if he moved too quickly. Each bite seemed to bring color back to his face. I held out a chipped mug of lukewarm water steeped with peppermint leaves, and he inhaled its faint steam, like it was medicine. For a while we sat in silence, sharing the night in a kind of communion. I thought of how little I had, yet how necessary it felt to give anyway. In his frailty, I saw my own reflection, two lives broken in different ways, clinging to the smallest acts of mercy. But then, the stillness fractured. A low rumble carried across the street, growing louder, shaking the ground beneath us. My head turned sharply as headlights swept the walls, flooding the alley in white glare. Black SUVs rolled into view, engines throbbing, tires grinding against the pavement. Doors swung open in unison, and men in uniforms poured out with sharp precision, rifles slung across their shoulders. I froze where I knelt, fear crawling up my spine. But the man beside me, my beggar, rose to his feet. His torn coat slipped from his shoulders, and in the blaze of headlights, his true form emerged. Beneath the rags was a tailored uniform, its insignias polished, its medals gleaming like distant stars. His posture shifted, back straight, chin lifted, every inch a man of command. The soldiers snapped to attention, saluting with rigid discipline. He returned their gesture with practiced ease, authority radiating from him in every movement. My heart raced as I stumbled back against the wall, unable to reconcile the man I thought I knew with the figure now commanding obedience. He glanced at me once, his expression unreadable. But in that fleeting second, I caught something raw behind his eyes. Gratitude, perhaps even regret. It vanished as quickly as it came. With a swift motion, he signaled the convoy forward. Engines roared. Boots struck pavement, and in moments the alley was empty again, the night swallowing them whole. I stood in the silence that followed, my breath shallow, the crust of bread still clutched in my palm. The man I had pitied was no beggar. He was someone powerful, someone whose secrets reached far beyond the shadows where I found him. And now he was gone, leaving me with only questions and a gnawing sense that my life would never return to what it had been. As the final taillights vanished, I stood alone with the torn crust in my hand and the echo of powerful engines in my ears. The alley's shadows whispered of secrets I'd dared not imagine. My mind raced. What debt did I owe this stranger in uniform? And what storm had I unwittingly unleashed by giving him one last meal? Armored vehicles lined the street like a parade of giants, their lead vehicle bearing the emblem I'd only seen in my rarest dreams. Suddenly, he strode out, no longer broken, but in full regalia, and he sought me by name. The next evening, the sound returned, deep, thunderous, impossible to ignore. My small apartment shook as engines roared outside, rattling the window panes and vibrating the floor beneath my feet. My heart raced as I pulled back the curtain. There they were, 3 black SUVs and a massive troop carrier lined up along Maple Street, their warning lights casting the neighborhood in flashes of red and gold. Neighbors gathered in doorways, whispering in fear and awe. Children clutched at their mothers' coats, while men stepped out of taxis to stare. The quiet street where I had lived unnoticed for years now stood transformed into a stage. And at the center of it all, my door. Soldiers spilled out of the vehicles, forming two rigid lines along the curb. Their boots struck the ground in unison, their rifles gleaming under the streetlight. They moved with mechanical precision, their formation creating a narrow aisle that led directly to me. My breath quickened as the knock came at my door, heavy but formal, as if echoing some ritual long rehearsed. Then I heard it. His voice. Clear, commanding, yet warm enough to carry through the hum of engines. Emma Clark. The sound of my name on his lips made my knees tremble. I gripped the doorknob with shaking hands and slowly opened it. The cold night air brushed against my face, sharp and biting, but I hardly noticed, because there he was. He walked toward me down the aisle of soldiers, his uniform impeccable, his boots polished to a sheen. Medals glittered across his chest, and golden braids traced the length of his shoulders. His cap bore the crest I had glimpsed on the convoy's doors, but his eyes, those were the same eyes I had seen in the alley, filled with hunger and quiet gratitude. When he reached me, he removed his cap in one graceful motion. For a fleeting second, I glimpsed the fragile man I once knew, but the weight of command soon replaced it, and he spoke with steady conviction. "Emma Clark," he said, his voice lowering. "Your kindness built this day." Confusion swirled inside me, but he gestured behind him, and my breath caught. Painted boldly on the sides of the vehicles were words I never expected to see. Clark's Covenant. My name, written across convoys of mobile kitchens, medical units, and relief trucks, an entire armada built on the crumbs I once gave away. Tears pricked at my eyes as the truth pressed down on me. The scraps I had believed worthless had grown into something vast, something that carried my name through the city streets. He extended his gloved hand toward me, his voice steady, almost reverent. "Join me." In that instant, the world seemed to pause. The neighbors watched in silence. The soldiers stood ready, and the engines rumbled as though waiting for my answer. My life until now had been small, hidden in shadows, but his outstretched hand promised something larger than anything I had ever dared to dream. He motioned for the convoy to halt, then stepped toward me with a salute, and in that instant, I realized I'd never been more visible. The engines rumbled again, awaiting his command. My breath caught. What mission lay ahead for a girl who once had nothing but the will to give? At dawn's first light, I stood trembling before a gleaming new kitchen bearing my name, its tall glass windows and polished sign proclaiming hope I once only dreamed of. As the scissors hovered above the vibrant ribbon, my lungs seized with doubt. Could the young woman who passed out stale crumbs truly deserve this moment of grandeur? The morning was painted in soft hues of rose and gold as mist drifted across the plaza. Before me stood a building that seemed too perfect to belong in my story. White brick walls rose tall, accented with bright blue trim, and above the entrance glowed bold lettering. Clark's Covenant Community Kitchen. Its polished glass windows reflected the crowd gathered, each pane capturing faces filled with anticipation. Volunteers in matching aprons bustled inside, laying out trays of fruit, vegetables, and steaming kettles of soup. Outside, families pressed closer, holding children by the hand, their expressions lit with both hope and disbelief. I could still feel the rough calluses on my palms, the sting of endless shifts washing dishes, and yet here I was, standing at the center of a grand opening dedicated to my name. The announcer's voice rang out over the microphone, introducing me as the heart of Clark's Covenant. Applause surged like a wave, crashing over me with its force. My hands trembled as I accepted the ceremonial scissors, their polished silver catching the light. I stared at the ribbon stretched before me, red, threaded with gold trim, and wondered if I was worthy to cut it. I thought of the nights in the alley, the stale bread crumbling between my fingers, the chipped mug of peppermint water I had shared with a stranger. Those moments had felt small, insignificant, barely enough to keep hope alive. And yet those crumbs had multiplied, carried on by hands I could not see, into something vast and unstoppable. I raised the scissors. The crowd hushed, hundreds of breaths held in unison. My reflection in the glass doors stared back at me, wide-eyed, uncertain. A girl who had lived on nothing but faith. With a decisive breath, I pressed the blades together. The ribbon snapped cleanly, fluttering to the ground like silk banners falling away. A cheer erupted. The doors swung open, revealing the kitchen's warm interior light. Families surged forward, greeted by volunteers ladling soup into bowls and passing out warm bread rolls. The smell of simmering tomatoes and herbs drifted into the plaza, mingling with the fresh morning air. Children clapped their hands in delight at the sight of food piled high on trays. I stepped through the threshold, my heart pounding. Inside, the space was alive with energy. Gleaming counters, stainless steel ovens, and a mural painted across the far wall. 2 hands, one trembling, one steady, passed a loaf of bread across a city skyline. My throat tightened at the sight, the mural a reflection of my own story, etched in color and light. Then my eyes fell upon a marble plaque mounted near the entrance. The inscription read, "In honor of Emma Clark and all who choose compassion." Below it, engraved in smaller letters, were dozens of names: donors, volunteers, partners. My gaze snagged on one I didn't recognize. Samuel Clark. My pulse quickened. The name was etched as though it belonged to this legacy, yet I had never known a Samuel in my family. Confusion swirled inside me, tangled with awe. My act of kindness had not only created a movement, it had uncovered pieces of a history I never knew I carried. The applause still echoed in the background, the sound of a community celebrating. But my mind was caught on that name, carved in stone. Who was Samuel Clark? Why was his name tied to mine in this work of compassion? I touched the plaque with trembling fingers, the letters cold under my skin. Whatever answers lay ahead, I knew this day was only the beginning. As I followed the ribbon of eager volunteers into the kitchen's cavernous interior, my mind whirled around that second name, Samuel Clark. Beneath the generosity and fanfare lurked a deeper story, one etched in stone and whispered by every donor's name. I knew then my journey was far from over. It had only just begun. He lifted a leather-bound ledger. My childhood meal tallies transformed into line items funding hundreds of life-saving projects. Every penciled note I ever made had become a blueprint for change, and I'd never even known my own power. The command center buzzed with quiet urgency, screens glowing with maps and figures, voices murmuring in careful coordination. Commander Hart guided me down a corridor, lined with charts and projections, until we reached a wide oak table. There, in the center, lay a heavy book bound in dark leather, its corners worn, its surface etched with time. He set his hand on it with reverence. "This," he said, his voice steady, "is where everything began." I leaned closer and gasped. The cover bore a strip of tape scrawled with 2 words, "Emma's Notes." My heart faltered. That was my notebook, my old spiral where I had scribbled the dates, the scraps of bread, the mugs of water I had shared in the alley. I thought I had lost it years ago, tucked beneath old coats or left in a box. Yet here it was, transformed into something I could barely recognize. Hart opened the ledger, and I stared at the pages. My clumsy handwriting stretched across them, uneven columns marked with tiny entries. January 5th, 2 rolls, January 12th, 1 mug of tea. Margins filled with stray thoughts. "So cold tonight," he smiled faintly. They were fragments of a life lived on survival, and yet now they stood preserved in this book of consequence. An aide leaned forward, pointing at the entries. We converted each note into a funding tier. 2 rolls became a $50 grant for a kitchen. 1 mug of tea became $20 toward clean water. Every act was matched and multiplied until it rippled into something larger. Her eyes shone as she spoke, as though my simple scribbles were sacred. I traced the page, my fingertips brushing across the rough pencil marks. I never thought anyone would see these, I whispered. I just wanted to remember what little I gave. Another aide nodded. But the world saw in them a blueprint. Donors realized that if one woman could track her compassion so faithfully, they could honor it by expanding the same principle across nations. Commander Hart turned a page, revealing neatly printed annotations added beside my words. Columns of numbers, dollar amounts, regions served. Every tiny act I had written became a foundation for a program, a feeding center, or a relief project. My humble notes had become a movement. I felt dizzy, the room spinning with the weight of revelation. What I once saw as scraps of memory had been treated as sacred scripture, amplified into a network touching thousands. My eyes blurred with tears. Hart pulled out a fountain pen and pressed it into my hand. At the bottom of the ledger's page was a line labeled Founder's Name. It was empty, waiting. My chest tightened as I realized what he was asking. With a trembling hand, I bent over the page. The pen felt heavier than any weapon, and as I pressed it to paper, I signed, Emma Clark. The ink gleamed against the cream paper, sealing my name into history. The room hushed. Every gaze turned toward me, reverent, expectant. I wanted to breathe, to take in the enormity of what had just happened, but before I could, the door burst open. A reporter rushed inside, camera lights flashing, her voice cutting through the solemnity. "Miss Clark," she demanded, "how does it feel to know your scribbled notes built an entire network of hope?" My lips parted, but no words came. The camera lens locked onto me, and I realized there was no hiding anymore. My name, my past, my choices, they all belonged to the world now. The reporter's question thundered in my skull as her camera light painted my face in stark white. Surrounded by aides and lenses, I realized I stood at a crossroads. Step into the spotlight and claim my legacy, or fade back into the quiet shadows I once called home. My hand hovered above my lips. I had to choose what kind of founder I would become. Under the glare of a spotlight and the hush of an expectant crowd, an aged photograph materialized on the giant screen. Me in braided pigtails, snow swirling around us as I offered a crust of bread to a trembling child. In that single frame, I recognized the quiet ember that ignited the entire movement I'd spent my life running from. The auditorium went dark, silence pressing against the hundreds of people gathered. All eyes fixed on the screen as the image flickered into view. A snowy graveyard, 2 children kneeling by a marker. One was me, younger than I could even remember, my braids stiff with frost, my small hands holding out a crust of bread. Opposite me was a boy in a coat far too large, his face pale but lit with desperate hope. Gasps rippled through the audience. My knees weakened as I stared at the frozen scene, memory slamming back with startling clarity. That day had been bitterly cold, the kind of cold that gnawed at bones. I had begged the orphanage cook for an extra roll, hiding it in my coat. I found him, my brother, though I hadn't known it then, curled beside our mother's gravestone, trembling. Without thinking, I offered him half. That tiny gesture, born from sorrow and hunger, had somehow been captured on film. Commander Hart's voice rang across the hall, steady and solemn. This photograph is the seed of Clark's covenant, the moment Emma Clark first proved that one act of compassion can ripple outward to change the world. The crowd erupted into applause, but I couldn't move. My chest heaved with emotion as my gaze stayed fixed on the boy's face. Memories swirled. Laughter in the snow, whispered promises in the orphanage, the day he vanished, and I thought I had lost him forever. The photo faded, replaced by a live feed of me standing among the audience. A spotlight snapped on, pinning me in its glow. My legs felt heavy, yet they carried me forward, up the aisle toward the stage. Applause thundered around me, but all I could hear was the echo of that winter day. At the foot of the screen, the photograph had been enlarged on an easel, its details sharper than memory. I reached out, fingertips brushing against the paper, feeling the weight of years pressed into its grain. Then, from the side of the stage, a figure stepped out. My breath caught as recognition slammed into me. The boy from the photograph, now grown, stood before me. Samuel, my lost brother. His uniform bore the Clark's Covenant insignia, his eyes shining with emotion. He spoke my name softly, voice trembling. Emma. Tears blurred my vision as I whispered back. Samuel. He crossed the stage in swift strides, closing the years between us with an embrace. My arms wrapped around him tightly, my heart breaking and healing all at once. The audience gasped, then erupted into standing ovation, but in that moment, it was only us. Two children reunited, no longer bound by absence. He pulled back, eyes wet, voice thick with emotion. That bread you gave me saved my life, and your courage kept me alive every day since I pressed my forehead against his, my tears falling freely. For so long I had carried the guilt of his absence. To hear him say those words lifted a burden I had thought permanent. Together we turned toward the crowd, still clinging to each other as Hart raised the microphone again. Emma and Samuel Clark, proof that compassion not only feeds the body, but restores the soul. The hall thundered with applause, banners waved, balloons rose into the rafters. And yet beneath the celebration, I felt a new question rising. That photograph had not only revealed our bond, it carried with it truths yet to be uncovered, truths hidden in snow and silence for decades. Samuel squeezed my hand as a reporter elbowed forward, camera flashing like a staccato heartbeat. He looked into my eyes, voice low. They want to know. What happened after this photo was taken? My breath caught. Some stories we've told. Others remain buried beneath winter's snow, waiting to be uncovered. He spoke my name before I could find my voice, tears glistening in his eyes like distant stars. The boy I'd mourned as lost to a winter's night was alive, and he had never truly left my side. The storm outside raged with a fury that shook the stained glass windows of the chapel, thunder rolling like a drumbeat of destiny. My heart pounded in rhythm with it as I descended the marble steps, my eyes fixed on the figure waiting in the foyer below. He stood there, in the glow of flickering chandeliers, older now but unmistakable. My brother, Samuel, the boy I had mourned for so many years, was alive, and he was staring at me with the same eyes I thought I'd never see again. Emma, he whispered, his voice trembling. My lips parted, but no words came. My knees weakened, and I stumbled forward until I collapsed into his arms. He caught me instantly, holding me as though he would never let go again. I pressed my face into his shoulder, the scent of rain and old wool wrapping around me, my tears soaking into his coat. For a moment, the years of grief melted away. I searched for you, he murmured, his voice breaking. Every day, every city, every orphanage. I never stopped looking. I thought you were gone forever, I choked out. I thought I lost you that night. He pulled back, his hands cupping my face. His eyes were bright with pain and relief all at once. You never lost me. Even when I didn't remember who I was, I remembered you. Your face stayed with me through every storm. The crowd around us, volunteers, donors, strangers, fell into hushed silence, watching our reunion as though it were a miracle. Commander Hart stepped forward, his expression softened. This, he said quietly, is where the covenant truly began. With your bond, I turned to look at Samuel, the boy who had once accepted a crust of bread by our mother's grave, now a man who had grown into strength I could barely comprehend. The chapel's candles flickered across his features, illuminating the journey written in the lines of his face. He wasn't just my brother. He was living proof of what kindness could preserve. We stepped together toward the pulpit, hand in hand. Samuel raised his voice, steady now, carrying across the hall. "I was lost," he said, "but Emma saved me with her compassion. That single act of sharing bread gave me the strength to survive. And today, I stand with her to carry this legacy forward." Applause erupted, echoing through the vaulted ceiling. Volunteers wept openly, families clasped each other's hands, and even the storm outside seemed to soften, its thunder fading into gentle rain. For the first time in years, I felt whole again. But the moment of peace shattered when the heavy doors creaked open. A figure stood framed in the stormlight, cloaked and hooded, rain dripping from the edges of their garment. The crowd hushed, every head turning toward the intruder. Slowly, the hood lowered, revealing eyes that mirrored mine and Samuel's, eyes full of secrets. "Emma, Samuel," the stranger said, their voice rich with familiarity. "It's time you knew the rest of the story." The chapel seemed to shrink around us, every breath suspended. My pulse roared in my ears as Samuel's grip on my hand tightened. As thunder rolled across distant hills, Emma and Samuel stared at the newcomer, an aunt they believed lost, bearing revelations that would shake their newly restored world. Rain dripped from their cloak, each droplet a promise of truths waiting to unravel. Together, the twins braced themselves. The storm outside was nothing compared to the one about to break in their hearts. He placed a sealed envelope in my trembling hand, its crimson wax crest the very emblem our mother wore. Inside lay the seed money for a foundation bearing my name. My own small act of kindness had come full circle, and now I stood at its unshakable heart. The war room was bathed in golden afternoon light, its long oak table polished to a shine. Screens along the walls glowed with maps of feeding routes and expansion plans. Yet all I could focus on was the envelope Commander Hart drew from his coat. The parchment was thick, its edges gilded, the seal pressed in crimson wax. My heart jolted when I recognized the crest, two clasped hands cradling a loaf of bread, the symbol my mother once kept on her letters. I reached out, fingers trembling, and took the envelope. The seal felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of generations. Hart's voice softened. "Emma, this gift comes from someone who wishes to remain unseen, but their fortune will ensure Clark's covenant lasts beyond our lifetimes." With care, I cracked the seal, the wax snapping like a secret finally broken. Inside was a letter written in elegant script. My eyes skimmed the words, my chest tightening with every line. An irrevocable trust of $50 million, designated as the Emma Clark Foundation, to feed the hungry, empower local growers, and forge partnerships where hunger reigns unchecked. I staggered, gripping the edge of the table for support. 50 million. My mind couldn't grasp it. Just nights ago, I'd counted crumbs, stretched mugs of tea, and prayed for strength to give again. And now, this. An inheritance I never expected, written in my name, carrying my vision. The aides around the table exchanged awed glances. One explained in hushed tones how the trust would fund permanent kitchens across 20 regions, microloans for co-ops, and training programs for farmers. Each word felt like a dream I had never dared to voice, now laid out as a blueprint for the future. But Samuel stepped forward then, his eyes steady. "Emma," he said, his voice carrying a weight no paper could match. "This is not anonymous. This money comes from our grandfather's estate. He left it with one condition, that we carry this mission together." I froze, the letter trembling in my hands. Grandfather? The name felt distant, almost mythical. I had never known him, never imagined he had left anything behind. And now, not only was his fortune tied to my name, but Samuel claimed it belonged to all of us, siblings and cousins alike. A tall woman stepped forward, her features sharp with determination. "I am Jane," she said. "Your cousin. Alongside Marcus, Samuel, and me, you share this legacy. Our grandfather left us equal governance." She handed me thick legal documents, the same crest stamped across the top. My eyes skimmed the clauses. Inheritance, trusteeship, shared board control. My vision blurred. I had been given a foundation, but I was not its sole guardian. I was one voice among many, and my family's claim bound us together. My stomach knotted. Could I share this mission? Would the purity of my vision survive politics, power, and conflict among us? Samuel touched my arm, his expression earnest. "Together, Emma," he said. That was grandfather's wish. Not one heart, but many. Not one name, but a family bound to serve. Tears stung my eyes as I looked between them all. I thought of the nights I had given away crumbs in silence, never expecting recognition. And now here I stood, bearing a responsibility bigger than myself, one I couldn't carry alone. I pressed the letter to my chest and nodded. "Then we do it together." Relief softened their faces, and Hart exhaled as though the future had just been secured. But before the moment could settle, the intercom chimed. A voice crackled through. "Commander Hart, Senator Reynolds has arrived to discuss partnerships." My pulse quickened. Politics had just entered the room, and I knew with certainty that the true test of our covenant was about to begin. As the siblings gathered around the oak table to sign the trust deed, a soft chime sounded on the room's intercom. The receptionist's voice crackled. "Commander Hart, a visitor for you. Senator Reynolds is here to discuss large-scale partnerships." My breath caught. Politics and power had just arrived at our doorstep, and the Foundation's first true test lay ahead. Their voices rose over mine in the echoing boardroom. Monetize the charity. Scale for profit. In that moment, I realized how easily good intentions could be twisted into ammunition, and I would refuse to let our mission be weaponized. The boardroom was a towering chamber of glass and steel, sunlight bouncing off polished wood and cold chrome. My siblings and cousins filled the long oval table, charts spread before them, their eyes glittering with ambition. Financial projections and growth models glowed on the wall-mounted screens. It looked less like a family gathering and more like a corporate takeover. Samuel spoke first, his voice smooth and persuasive. "We've spoken with investors. They're ready to fund expansions if we restructure Clark's Covenant as a franchise model. Kitchens could be opened in every major city, each generating revenue." Mary leaned forward, her tone sharp with excitement. "Imagine 30 kitchens in the first year alone. We sell shares, attract corporate sponsors, and turn donations into sustainable capital. We'll scale faster than any charity in history." Marcus tapped a tablet, scrolling through projections. "We can license our brand, sell proprietary meal prep systems, charge NGOS for access. This is the future. Charity run like an enterprise." Jane smiled thinly. "And the best part? Every dollar earns returns. Investors get profit, communities get food. It's a win-win." I sat at the head of the table, my palms damp against the polished surface. My stomach twisted as their words echoed. Was this what my grandfather envisioned? Was this what my crumbs of bread had become? An opportunity for profit. "You want to sell shares in our covenant?" I asked quietly, my voice carrying in the silence that followed. "You want to turn generosity into dividends?" Mary nodded eagerly. "It's not selling out. It's scaling up." I closed my eyes briefly, remembering the man in the alley, the trembling hands clutching a stale crust. No ledger, no boardroom, no profit. Just survival, shared between two broken souls. I opened my eyes again, my chest tightening. "No," I said firmly. Clark's covenant was born from compassion freely given, not from monetized contracts. The moment we tie our work to profit, we lose the soul of what we built. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Jane crossed her arms. Emma, you're letting emotion cloud judgment. We can feed millions this way. Isn't that the goal? Not at the cost of integrity, I shot back. Not if it means turning kindness into currency. Samuel's expression flickered with conflict. Emma, please. Grandfather wanted growth. He believed in sustainability. He also believed in compassion, I said, my voice rising. This isn't growth. It's greed dressed in philanthropy. Mary exhaled sharply, gathering her papers. If you won't sign, we'll proceed without you. One by one they rose from the table. Samuel hesitated, his gaze torn before following them. The heavy door slammed behind them, leaving me alone in the echo of ambition. I lowered my hands, my chest aching, when a draft rustled the papers left behind. A single contract slid across the polished surface. My eyes caught the bold letters at the bottom. My name. My signature is already inked. My breath caught. Had I signed in at a moment of distraction, or had someone forged my approval? The page trembled in my grip, the ink gleaming like a brand. Outside, thunder rolled, rattling the glass walls. My pulse hammered as footsteps echoed back toward the room. Mary's heels, sharp and certain. The door handle turned. As the thunder rolled, the signed contract lay heavy in my hand. I sensed footsteps returning, Mary's heels clicking against the marble, her triumphant grin already forming. I realized I had a choice: tear up the page and defy my family, or let my doubt undo everything I'd fought to protect. The storm outside paled beside the one rising within me. In a grand hall dripping with crystal chandeliers and marble columns, I faced a row of steel-faced tycoons poised to finalize their hostile takeover. Every syllable I spoke tonight would decide whether my childhood dream lived on or died under the weight of corporate greed. The hall looked like something from a gilded age: red velvet drapes, portraits of forgotten magnates glaring down from gilded frames, and 2 crystal chandeliers scattering light like 1,000 shards of glass. At the long oak table, 10 executives in tailored suits sat rigid, their eyes cold, pens poised above contracts. The scent of polished wood and expensive cologne mixed with something sharper: tension. I stood at the opposite end, clutching the old ledger against my chest. Its worn leather carried the weight of every crumb I had once counted, every act of survival that had somehow grown into this sprawling covenant. My allies, community leaders who had once been fed by our kitchens, stood behind me, their presence steadying my knees. Clearing my throat, I placed the ledger on the table. Its thud echoed in the cavernous chamber. "This," I said, my voice, trembling but loud enough to carry, "is the beginning. These pages are not profit margins. They are lives saved, dignity restored. This covenant is not for sale." The chairman leaned back in his chair, his face carved from stone. "Miss Clark, sentiment doesn't pay bills. Our offer ensures sustainability. Sign the merger, and Clark's covenant scales globally. Refuse, and you'll collapse under your own weight." I swallowed, my fingers tightening on the ledger. "If you turn this into a business, you strip it of its soul. Food cannot be a commodity. Compassion cannot be franchised." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One executive closed his tablet with a snap. "Then present your alternative. How do you expect to feed millions without capital?" I opened the ledger to its first page, the childish scrawl of my handwriting still faintly visible. "Like this," I said. "One roll at a time. One act at a time. We build through trust, through transparency, through community, not by selling kindness to the highest bidder." A hush fell over the room. For a heartbeat, I thought I had reached them. The chairman tapped his pen against the contract, his jaw tight. "And if your model fails? Will you bear the blame for the hungry you couldn't feed?" Yes, I said, my voice steady now. Better to fail with integrity than succeed through betrayal. Before the tension could settle, a shrill alarm split the silence. Red lights flashed along the walls. The heavy steel doors slammed shut with a hiss, locking us inside. Smoke curled from vents in the ceiling, faint but unmistakable. Gasps erupted. Executives scrambled. Lawyers knocked over chairs. My allies pressed close to me in fear. My lungs tightened as the acrid scent burned my throat. This wasn't just a meeting anymore. It was a trap. The chairman's eyes flickered, not with surprise, but with grim recognition. "No one leaves," he said coldly. "Not until this contract is signed." My heart hammered as I clutched the ledger to my chest. The chandeliers swayed with the vibrations of panic, shadows dancing wildly across marble walls. This was no longer about profit or partnership. This was survival, and the Covenant's future would be decided in the smoke-filled air of this chamber. Smoke coiled around the chandeliers as the security lights flickered. My allies crouched behind the table, chairs overturned as makeshift barricades. The chairman's cold gaze met mine. "No one leaves until the ledger is signed." I looked down at my trembling hand, the original ledger pressed against my heart, and knew I would have to fight to keep kindness alive, no matter the cost. Protesters surged through the marble corridors, placards aloft, voices thunderous in unison. "No more lies! No more profit!" In that electrifying moment, I realized charity was not a passive virtue, but a battle for hearts, and I would fight to protect every life at stake. The sound hit, first, a roar of voices rising like a tidal wave, echoing through the corridors of marble and glass. Then came the crash of shattering glass as windows gave way, spraying shards across the grand foyer. The once pristine building, designed for polished negotiations, now trembled under the weight of rebellion. I hurried down the stairwell, scarf pulled over my mouth against the sting of tear gas. Protesters flooded the lobby, their faces lit with fury and determination. Some carried signs, "Feed, don't franchise, hope is not for sale." Others linked arms, chanting my name. "Emma Clark! Emma Clark!" Their voices weren't just protest, they were a plea. Security guards braced with shields near the staircases, forming lines, but even they looked uncertain. The crowd wasn't faceless strangers. Many were people who had once eaten at our kitchens, families whose lives had been changed by our covenant. And now, they had come to defend it. Commander Hart stood firm in the chaos, baton lowered but voice strong. "Hold the line! Protect the covenant!" His words cut through the haze, steadying the guards. At his signal, they formed a corridor to shield volunteers and staff escaping the worst of the smoke. In the middle of the chaos, a young man climbed onto a desk, raising a faded photograph above his head. My chest constricted as I recognized it instantly. The image of two children in the snow, sharing a loaf of bread. My childhood, frozen in sepia, now lifted as a banner of truth. The protest leader, Javier, locked eyes with me across the lobby. "Emma," he shouted, his voice raw, "this is why we fight. Don't let them erase what you built." He pressed the photo against his chest, holding it like a shield. My heart pounded. That photo had always been a reminder of where this began, compassion untainted by profit or politics. To see it in Javier's hand, carried into battle, told me that the covenant didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been touched by it. I moved forward, my steps slow but certain, until I stood face to face with Javier. The crowd hushed around us, the chants faltering into silence. He extended the photograph toward me, his hand trembling. "This is yours," he said. "But it's also ours now. Protect it." I took the photo, the paper fragile in my hand, edges frayed by time and struggle. The weight of it grounded me. Around me, protesters leaned closer, eyes fierce with expectation. Behind me, Hart and the guards stood ready. For the first time, I didn't feel like a founder standing above a movement. I felt like part of it, carried by the same hunger, the same hope. The boardroom doors clanged shut at the far end of the hall, locked from within. Someone shouted that the executives had triggered the lockdown. We had only minutes before they enacted whatever plan they had devised. I lifted the photo high above my head, letting it catch the light. "This covenant will not be sold," I cried, my voice breaking but strong. "It belongs to the people." A thunderous cheer answered me, rattling the marble columns. The uprising had found its voice, and it was mine. Sirens wailed again as smoke thickened, and the boardroom doors clanged ominously. Javier gripped my hand, pressing the photograph into my palm. "They've locked the boardroom," he said, voice urgent. "And they've triggered the lockdown protocols. We have minutes, maybe seconds, to reclaim our covenant before it's lost forever." That photograph carried more than nostalgia. It bore a cryptic message scrawled in faded ink. "Find the source, or all is lost." My breath caught, pulse pounding. What hidden reality lay beneath my story of compassion? I realized our entire journey hinged on a truth long obscured. Late that night, when the crowd had dispersed and the protest fires had cooled to embers, I sat alone with the photograph. Its edges were frayed, the ink faded, yet beneath the watermark of our family crest, faint pencil markings appeared. Numbers, coordinates. My fingers traced them, slowly. 42.3561 degrees north, 71.4988 degrees west. Samuel leaned over my shoulder, his eyes widening. "That's the old warehouse at Harbor Road," he said, his voice low. "The place we used to call Sanctuary." A shiver ran through me. As children, we had hidden there, carving our names into the beams, whispering our secrets into the dust. I thought it was just a forgotten ruin, a refuge only ours. But now, the photograph told us it was something more. Without hesitation, we took lanterns and drove through the rain-slick streets. The docks loomed in silhouette against the skyline, their rusted cranes stretching like skeletons. The warehouse stood where it always had, silent, hulking, waiting. Inside, our footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. The air smelled of brine and dust. My lantern cast thin light across graffiti-smeared walls, broken pallets, and forgotten crates. Memories swirled. Laughter, fear, whispered promises. Then Samuel stopped, his hand brushing aside a stack of rotting planks. There it was. A vault door, half hidden in shadow. Rust streaked its surface, but the crest was unmistakable. 2 clasped hands cradling a loaf. Our family's symbol. My chest tightened as the lantern's light danced across it. Samuel pulled a key from his coat, its handle engraved with the same crest. "Grandfather left this," he whispered. With trembling hands, he slid it into the lock. The mechanism clicked, echoing through the cavern like a drumbeat. The vault creaked open, revealing shelves stacked with ledgers, maps, and sealed crates. Dust swirled like ghosts around us. I stepped forward, my fingers brushing a spine. The ledger fell open in my hand, its pages filled with entries that chilled me. Shipments, coded transactions, routes disguised as relief efforts. "These weren't just humanitarian records," I murmured. "They were something else. Smuggling? Trade? Deals hidden under charity's name." Samuel's jaw tightened. "This is the truth," he said. "The covenant wasn't just born of kindness. It was built on secrets. Grandfather used compassion as both shield and sword." I staggered back, the weight of it pressing into my chest. My whole life I had believed in purity, in crumbs freely given. Yet here was proof that our family had hidden another side of the story, one of power, leverage, and survival cloaked in benevolence. Tears blurred my eyes as I pressed the ledger shut. Then what are we really standing on? Is our covenant a blessing or a lie? Samuel placed a hand on my shoulder, his eyes steady but full of sorrow. "It can still be what we make it," he said softly. "But first we have to face what came before." As we turned to leave, The vault door swung shut behind us with a heavy thud. The sound reverberated like a warning. And then, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing through the corridor. A shadow emerged, cloaked and hooded, their face hidden. My heart pounded as the figure stopped at the threshold. A rasping voice cut through the silence. "You've found the source," they said. "Now you must decide what to do with what remains." As we turned to leave, the vault's door swung shut on its own, thudding with finality. A set of footsteps echoed behind us. We paused, breath stilling, as a figure stepped into the dim corridor. The last guardian of this vault, with a shadowed face half hidden beneath a hood. "You found the source," the voice rasped. "Now you must decide what to do with what remains." As sunrise broke over the battered city, I stood before hundreds of volunteers, my past and future united in a single purpose. In that moment, we had rewritten the rules of charity forever. The plaza was alive with the glow of morning light, its broken pavement transformed into a living tapestry of tents, tables, and people. Steam rose from pots of soup simmering on portable stoves, the scent mingling with the crisp air. Children clutched bowls, elders shared benches, volunteers moved swiftly from table to table. What once felt like an impossible dream now stood before me, beating with life. I climbed onto a small wooden stage, the kind built for community festivals, now repurposed for something greater. The crowd hushed, hundreds of faces turning toward me. Their expressions carried every story of survival, every scar and smile, every ounce of faith that had carried us here. Taking the microphone, my voice trembled but grew steady as it carried across the square. "Today we are not here to hand out charity," I said. "We are here to make a promise. A covenant built on transparency, dignity, and compassion." Applause erupted, then softened as I raised my hand. No more hidden ledgers. No more profits disguised as kindness. If you give, you will see where every coin goes. If you receive, you will be honored. If you serve, you will be celebrated. "This covenant belongs to us all," the crowd cheered, their voices rising like a hymn. Among them I saw faces I recognized, mothers who once waited in soup lines now ladling stew for others, children who had once trembled with hunger now handing out bread rolls, volunteers whose loyalty had carried us through betrayal now standing proud. From the edge of the plaza, a convoy door opened. Commander Hart stepped out in uniform, his salute crisp, his eyes warm. He said nothing, but the gesture alone carried the weight of a vow. He stood beside me, not as commander, but as comrade. I returned the salute with my whole heart. Then Samuel approached, followed by Mary, Jane, and Marcus. For a moment, silence hung heavy. Their faces carried the memory of division, of boardroom betrayals, of contracts and power plays. But now, their heads bowed, their voices joined. "We were wrong," they said in unison. "We're with you." The crowd gasped, then broke into thunderous applause. Tears blurred my vision as I opened my arms. In the light of dawn, forgiveness was not weakness, but strength. I pulled them into an embrace, our family bound again, not by blood alone, but by purpose. After the speeches ended, I stepped down into the crowd. At a long wooden table, a chain of people passed warm bread from hand to hand. Immigrant mothers, refugee fathers, children with shy smiles, veterans with weary eyes. I joined them, placing my hand gently over the loaf as it moved from one person to the next. The bread was simple, yet it carried everything: memory, unity, resilience. In that moment, I saw the covenant not as mine, not as my family's, but as something larger. It was alive in every hand that touched that bread. I closed my eyes, and for a heartbeat, I felt time collapse. The alley, the graveyard, the ledger, the protests, the vault, they all led here. Every struggle had been worth it for this, a circle of humanity, unbroken. Then a faint whirring filled the air. I opened my eyes to see a drone hovering above, its camera lens focused on us. The world was watching. Our covenant was no longer hidden in alleys or confined to boardrooms. It was alive, visible, undeniable. As I placed my hand above the passing bread, a gentle whirring filled the air. My eyes lifted to see a drone camera hovering above the plaza, capturing every moment. Our story, once born of hidden crumbs, was now live for the world to witness. And as the drone's lens focused on our united circle, I realized the next chapter was not mine alone, but ours to write. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful narratives that move the soul. Your support helps us bring forgotten voices and hidden truths to light. Leave a comment below. What moment stayed with you the most? This journey is just beginning, and we want you with us every step of the way.